My name is Gloria. I'm 59 years old, and a week after my father's funeral, my brother handed me a new will that erased me from our family. Everyone thought I'd lost everything that day, but they didn't know my father left behind one secret that would destroy him instead. The day my father died was the day my brother began rewriting my life. For most of my adult years, I believed I understood grief. As a bookstore owner in a small town in upstate New York, I'd spent decades surrounded by stories about loss and redemption. I thought that reading about sorrow prepared you for it, but nothing in those pages could have braced me for the silence that filled our family home when my father, Leonard Hughes, took his final breath. My father wasn't a wealthy man by any modern measure, but he was rich in wisdom. A retired literature professor, he saw beauty in every small thing: a well-made sentence, a blooming magnolia, a daughter who kept her promises. From the time I was a girl, he taught me that integrity was worth more than money. Character, he used to say, is the only inheritance that can't be stolen. I didn't realize how prophetic those words were. My younger brother Martin was the opposite of him. Where Dad was steady and thoughtful, Martin burned fast and bright. He was charming enough to talk his way out of anything, and for reasons I never fully grasped, he could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Even when his impulsive business schemes failed, even when he forgot birthdays or skipped holidays, our father would smile and say, "He just needs to find his way." I tried to believe that too. When Mom passed away from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, our family became a two-person team, my father and me. Martin had already moved to Chicago, chasing investments that always seemed just one deal away from success. I stayed behind, keeping the old house warm, running my little bookshop, visiting Dad each evening with dinner and conversation. Our routines became sacred tea at 7, poetry at 8, silence at 9, the kind of peaceful rhythm that fills the heart even when it aches. In his last year, the cancer returned, and I watched the man who once carried stacks of books through crowded lecture halls struggle to lift a spoon. I left the shop in the care of my assistant and moved back into the family home. Every night, I'd read to him Frost, Dickinson, Steinbeck while he drifted between sleep and memory. One night, barely audible, he took my hand and said, "Gloria, you've done more for me than anyone. Don't worry, you'll be taken care of." I never asked what he meant. I didn't have to. I trusted him. He died on a Tuesday morning, while rain tapped gently against the bedroom window. I remember because the scent of wet pine still brings tears to my eyes. The house that once smelled of old books and lemon polish turned into a mausoleum overnight. Friends dropped by with casseroles. Neighbors whispered condolences. But it was Martin's arrival that felt the strangest. He showed up the next afternoon, wearing an expensive black coat and an expression I couldn't read, half sorrow, half calculation. He hugged me stiffly. "You did everything you could, Glory," he said, using the nickname only he ever used. But there was no warmth in it. He immediately began discussing funeral details, the estate, the necessary paperwork. I should have found relief in his efficiency, but instead I felt like an intruder watching a stranger sort through my father's life. At the funeral, Martin delivered a short, practiced eulogy that mentioned our father's brilliance but skipped over his tenderness. I stood beside him, clutching a small bundle of daisies, and wondered when my brother had grown so distant. After the service, while I lingered by the casket, he busied himself greeting guests like a host at a business luncheon. When I tried to talk about Dad's favorite poems for the memorial program, he brushed me off. "People don't want to hear about poetry, Glory. Keep it short and simple." That was Martin in one sentence, short and simple, even with grief. A few days later, I received a call from Mr. Holloway, my father's longtime attorney. He asked me to come in for the reading of the will. His tone was polite but oddly formal, like a man reciting a line he didn't want to say. "Your brother has already arranged a private appointment," he added. Private? My heart skipped. Why would Martin decide that? When I mentioned it to Martin, he smiled tight-lipped, confident. "It's just business, Glory. No need for a crowd. Dad wanted things to be efficient." Efficient. That word again. It followed Martin everywhere, the way perfume follows vanity. The morning of the reading, I dressed carefully in one of Dad's favorite colors, a soft blue cardigan he once said made me look like a bit of sky on a cloudy day. As I drove to the law office, the autumn trees blurred past in streaks of gold and rust. I kept rehearsing what Dad had told me about fairness, about how proud he was of my loyalty. I clung to that memory like armor. Mr. Holloway's office sat above an old bank building, smelling faintly of dust and coffee. When I entered, Martin was already there, lounging in the leather chair opposite the lawyer's desk. He looked perfectly at ease, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up just long enough to smirk. "You made it," he said. I took the seat beside him, hands folded tightly in my lap. The lawyer shuffled a thick folder of papers, clearing his throat. For a moment, everything was still: the ticking wall clock, the muted city noise outside, my heartbeat drumming against my ribs. Mr. Holloway adjusted his glasses. "This is the last will and testament of Leonard Hughes, dated 6 months prior to his passing." Martin leaned back, smiling, faintly. I frowned, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. Then the lawyer began to read. And in those few sentences, my entire world tilted. My father's warm, careful words were gone, replaced by language that felt cold and foreign. As the sentences unfolded, a chill swept through me, and I realized something terrible, something deliberate had been done. When the lawyer began to read, I realized my father's words had been replaced, and my brother's lies were now written in ink. The first line of that will felt like a knife to my chest. "Mr." Holloway's voice was calm and practiced, but the words he read didn't belong to my father. They sounded sterile, transactional, not the kind of language a man like Leonard Hughes would ever use when speaking about his life's work or his children. He read slowly, his tone deliberate, but every sentence felt heavier than the last. "I, Leonard Hughes, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my home, savings and all business interests to my son, Martin Hughes." The rest blurred into meaningless noise. My heart began to pound so hard I could barely hear the rest of the reading. My name was missing entirely. No mention of me, no acknowledgement of my care. The years I devoted to my father's comfort, the promises he made when his strength was fading. I interrupted before Mr. Holloway could finish. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "There must be a mistake. That can't be right." He looked up, startled by my outburst. "Mrs. Green, it's Miss Hughes," I corrected sharply. "And you must have the wrong will." Beside me, Martin exhaled a quiet sigh, almost theatrical in its patience. "Gloria, please don't do this." I turned on him, my voice cracking. "Don't what? Ask for the truth?" Mr. Holloway removed his glasses and polished them, avoiding eye contact. "I assure you, Miss Hughes, this is the latest version of your father's will, signed and notarized 6 months ago. It's perfectly valid." 6 months ago, that was during the summer when Dad was already bedridden, struggling to hold a pen without shaking. I remembered guiding his hand to sign greeting cards because he couldn't keep his fingers steady. There was no way he'd gone to a lawyer's office, no way he'd changed his will on his own. "This doesn't make sense," I said, shaking my head. "My father told me everything was to be split fairly. He said that himself." Martin leaned forward, clasping his hands like some corporate mediator. "Dad was just trying to make things simpler," he said. "You know how he worried about complications. He wanted me to handle the finances, that's all." "That's all?" I snapped. "You mean he wanted to erase me?" Martin sighed again, his tone dripping with false pity. "Gloria, don't make a scene. You're upset. You've been under a lot of stress lately." Mr. Holloway cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should—" "No," I cut him off. "I want to see the signature. Right now." He hesitated but finally turned the document toward me. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. It looked like my father's signature, but wrong, hesitant, uneven. The letters malformed like someone trying too hard to copy his style. My father's handwriting had always been crisp, elegant, the product of decades teaching composition. This looked forced. "That's not his signature," I whispered. Martin laughed softly. "Gloria, please. You're embarrassing yourself." The lawyer gave a polite but firm nod. "I assure you, Miss Hughes, this was properly witnessed and recorded." I looked between the two men, one wearing indifference like armor, the other shrinking behind professionalism, and felt a chill run through me. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I don't care what that paper says," I said. "My father would never do this. Never." Martin rose as well. stepping close enough for me to smell his cologne, sharp, metallic, the kind of scent that lingered like arrogance. "Gloria," he said in a low voice. "Don't drag the family name through the mud. Let it go." "Let it go?" I repeated, disbelief turning into anger. "You've stolen everything, and you want me to let it go?" He didn't flinch. He just smiled a slow, cruel smile that I hadn't seen since we were children, and he'd gotten away with something. "Dad's gone," he said softly. "It's time to move on." I left before I did something I'd regret. My eyes burned as I stormed out of the office, the autumn wind hitting my face like shards of glass. I barely remember the drive home. By the time I reached the house, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly fit the key in the lock. Inside, everything felt foreign, the furniture, the photos, even the air. The home that once felt warm and safe now carried the scent of betrayal. I sat in my father's old armchair and stared at the framed photograph of the three of us from years ago. Martin's smile in the picture looked innocent back then. I realized now how much of his charm had always been an act. As night fell, I wandered into my father's study. Dust clung to the bookshelves, and the air was thick with the faint smell of cedar and paper. I opened drawers, looking for any sign of a will, an envelope, a letter, anything that could prove what I already knew in my heart. When I reached the bottom drawer, I found the small lockbox Dad used to keep important papers and birth certificates, deeds, old family records. The latch was broken. My pulse quickened. Someone had forced it open. Inside were only a few scattered receipts and a broken pen, the same model my father always used to sign official documents. I sank to my knees. The silence of the house pressed down on me. Somewhere beneath the grief and confusion, anger began to stir. My father had trusted both of us equally. He'd spoken of fairness, of legacy, of love, and now everything he built, every book, every brick, every word belonged to Martin. No, that wasn't right. That wasn't possible. I knew my father better than anyone. He was deliberate, meticulous, and above all, honest. He wouldn't have changed his will without telling me. He couldn't have. There was only one explanation: someone else had changed it for him. I stood, my reflection flickering in the darkened study window. My hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was fury, cold, clear, and focused. That night, I whispered aloud to the empty room, I swore I'd uncover the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of my family. I didn't just lose my inheritance, I lost my identity. For days after the will reading, I moved through life like a ghost in my own house. Every corner held memories of my father, but they no longer felt like mine. I'd pour tea into his favorite mug, only to set it down untouched. I'd open one of his books and find his neat handwriting in the margins, those familiar annotations that once made me smile. Now, they made me ache. The betrayal was too heavy to process. It wasn't only the money, it was the erasure. It felt as if Martin had rewritten my father's love and cut me out of his story entirely. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf in Dad's study, I noticed a stack of old birthday cards bound with twine. Each one was signed in his perfect cursive, "Love always, Dad." I compared one of those signatures to the jagged one on the will I'd copied at Mr. Holloway's office. The difference was like night and day. Dad's real signature was smooth, balanced, with a subtle rightward slant. The one on the will looked hesitant, shaky, uneven, as if someone had traced it from memory. My chest tightened. It wasn't grief anymore. It was certainty. I spread the cards, letters, and legal copy across the desk like pieces of a puzzle. My heart pounded as I took photos, zoomed in, and circled every inconsistency I could see. There were too many. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Holloway's office. When he answered, his voice sounded cautious, like he'd been expecting this call. "Mr. Holloway," I said, "I need to ask you something directly. Who brought you that will?" There was a pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. "Your brother delivered it," he said finally. "He said your father wanted him to handle the logistics." "And you never saw my father sign it?" I pressed. He hesitated again. "No, I received the signed document from Martin. Everything appeared in order." "Appeared," I repeated, "but you can't confirm you witnessed it." He cleared his throat. "Miss Hughes, I've handled your family's affairs for 20 years, I assure you. Then you know my father's handwriting as well as I do," I cut in. Tell me it doesn't look forged. His tone changed, softer but fearful. I can't say that, Miss Hughes. Please, let's not discuss this over the phone. But I didn't need him to. His silence was enough. After I hung up, I sat motionless for a long time, listening to the creak of the old floorboards and the rain tapping at the window. My father once mentioned something that suddenly came rushing back: his safe deposit box at the local bank. In case anything happens, he'd said one night, there's a copy of everything that matters. A spark of hope flared in me. If the real will existed anywhere, it would be there. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The manager recognized me instantly. Miss Hughes, he said gently. I'm sorry about your father. How can I help you? I need access to my father's safe deposit box, I told him. I'm listed as an authorized user. He typed something into his computer, then frowned. It was emptied last month. My stomach dropped. By whom? He hesitated. It says family authorization. Your brother signed the release. I stared at him. That's impossible. I never. He glanced up sympathetically. He provided documentation. Everything appeared legitimate. Appeared. That word again. I left the bank trembling, realizing that Martin's forgery went far deeper than one signature. He'd stolen the evidence that could have saved me. Back home, I sat on the porch steps, watching rain blur the world into streaks of gray. For the first time since Dad's death, I let myself cry, not quiet, restrained tears, but a full, aching release that shook my body. When it was over, I felt hollow. But inside that emptiness was a spark of something new: resolve. That evening, I called my oldest friend, Janine Merritt, a woman who'd known me since college. She listened as I poured out everything: the will, the signature, the bank. When I finally ran out of words, she said simply, You need proof, Gloria. Solid proof. See a handwriting expert. Make it official. The next day, I drove to Albany to meet a forensic document examiner recommended by Janine's cousin. The expert, a meticulous woman named Dr. Eleanor Briggs, spread my evidence across a lightbox. For an hour, she examined every curve and stroke with magnifiers and digital overlays. When she finally looked up, her expression was grave. Miss Hughes, she said, this signature is absolutely not authentic. Whoever forged it tried to mimic your father's rhythm but lacked his natural pressure and spacing. I'll prepare a formal report for you. Her words hit like thunder. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. The truth was real, and now I had proof. With the report in my hand, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't felt in weeks. That evening, I drove straight to my father's house, the house Martin now called his own. His expensive car was parked in the driveway, its metallic shine mocking me in the dying sunlight. I rang the bell. When he opened the door, he looked irritated, as though I'd interrupted something important. What do you want, Gloria? I want you to look at something. I held out the folder. A certified handwriting analysis. It proves you forged Dad's will. He glanced at it, then burst into laughter, loud, hollow laughter that echoed through the hallway. You've lost it, he said. You're actually delusional. It's all in there, I insisted. Dr. Briggs confirmed it. Even Mr. Holloway is starting to. He cut me off. You'd better stop right there. Keep pushing this, and I'll have you arrested for harassment. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? The respectable businessman? He stepped closer, his smile turning predatory. You were always jealous, always the martyr. Dad pitied you, Gloria. For a moment, I thought about slapping him. Instead, I turned and walked away, clutching the folder so tightly it crumpled in my hands. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from fury. As I reached my car, I looked back at the glowing windows of the house that used to be ours. Martin's silhouette passed by the curtains, careless and confident. He thought he'd won, but I wasn't defeated, not yet. Driving home under the silver moonlight, I realized something sharp and certain. Martin hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He was trying to erase me from our father's legacy entirely, to pretend I never existed. He wanted me gone. And if that was what he wanted, he was about to see what I could do when I had nothing left to lose. You'd think blood would protect you. You'd be wrong. If grief had a second act, mine was isolation. It started quietly, little things at first. A few phone calls went unanswered, an invitation to Sunday dinner, Rescinded. People who'd once hugged me at the grocery store now looked away. The world around me didn't change overnight, but it soured, like milk left too long in the sun. Martin had started whispering. I could feel it. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought people were simply uncomfortable with death, with the ugliness of legal battles. But then Janine called one afternoon, her voice low and uneasy. Gloria, I don't know how to tell you this, she said, but Martin's been saying things. I braced myself. What things? That you're unstable. That you've been spiraling since your father passed. He's telling people you're obsessed with money, that you can't let go. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The betrayal burned hotter than any insult. Unstable? I whispered. He's the one who forged a will. I know, Janine said gently. But not everyone does, and you know how people love gossip. By the end of the week, felt it everywhere the distance. My neighbor across the street, who used to drop off muffins every Saturday, suddenly stopped waving. My cousin Laurel, who'd once been like a sister to me, sent a curt text. I think you need rest, not revenge, Gloria. Even the church I'd attended for 20 years stopped calling about community events. I was becoming the villain in a story I hadn't written. The final blow came in a crisp white envelope marked Notice of Sale. My father's property, our family home, was going on the market. Martin was selling it. I stood in the doorway holding that letter, my breath frozen in my chest. The house that held every laugh, every memory, every echo of my father's life would soon belong to someone else. I drove to my cousin Laurel's house that same evening, desperate for someone to listen. She opened the door with a forced smile, her husband lingering behind her like a guard. Laurel, please, I began. You've known me since we were kids. You know I'm not after money. Martin forged Dad's will, I have proof. Her eyes darted away. Martin said you'd say that. Martin said? I felt my throat tighten. Do you hear yourself? He's lying, Laurel. He's manipulating everyone. Dad told me he'd never change the will. He was too weak to even hold a pen that summer. Her husband cleared his throat. Gloria, maybe it's best you talk to a professional. Grief can make us imagine things. Imagine things. I left before I broke something. That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of old letters and the handwriting report from Dr. Briggs. They looked like flimsy weapons against the fortress of deceit my brother had built. For every truth I uncovered, Martin created a dozen lies. Days turned to weeks, and the silence around me grew thicker. Even my customers at the bookshop grew scarce. Whispers followed me when I walked down Main Street. That's her. I heard one woman mutter. The one suing her own brother. I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, that justice was on my side, but in a small town, perception is louder than truth. Then one night, as I closed up the shop, an old man stood waiting by the door, Henry Caldwell, my father's best friend. His weathered face looked pained, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his hat. Gloria, he said softly, I've been meaning to come see you. There's something I think you should know. He glanced around before stepping inside. A few months before Leonard passed, Martin came to me, said your father was thinking about changing the will. He wanted me to convince him it was a good idea. My heart sank. Did you? Henry shook his head. Of course not. I told him your father would never do that. But Martin, he was persistent, said Leonard was confused, that you were taking advantage. I thought it was just talk. I never imagined he'd actually do something. It felt like the room tilted. So he'd been planning this, I whispered. Even before Dad died. Henry nodded solemnly. I'm sorry, Gloria. I should have told you sooner. After he left, I sat there for a long time staring at the empty chair across the table, my father's chair. The weight of what Martin had done pressed on me until I could barely breathe. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen my father's dignity, my reputation, my place in the world. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint in probate court, officially contesting the will. The clerk at the counter gave me a sympathetic smile and a stack of forms that felt heavier than my grief. It's a slow process, she warned. And expensive. Expensive was an understatement. Legal fees began piling up faster than I could manage. I started dipping into my savings, then my business account. Some nights I sat at my desk with my calculator and stared at the numbers until they blurred together. A week later, I received a letter from Martin's attorney. The words cease and desist were printed in bold across the top. He accused me of defamation, warning that if I continued spreading false claims, Martin would sue me personally. I laughed when I read it, a bitter, humorless sound that startled even me. The audacity was almost unbelievable. He stole our father's will and then had the nerve to accuse me of slander. Still, fear crept in. I didn't have Martin's money, his influence, or his allies. What I had was dwindling savings and a town full of people who thought I'd lost my mind. Bills piled up. My shop's sales dropped. Some days I wondered if this was exactly what Martin wanted for me to be so broken and exhausted that I'd give up. But each time I thought about quitting, I remembered the night I found the broken lockbox, the missing papers, my father's trembling signature forged by my brother's greed. That image kept me standing when everything else was falling apart. If the law moved too slowly, I would find another way. Martin might have the town's sympathy, but I still had the truth, and truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of breaking through the lies. The world believed Martin's lies. But soon, they'd see who he really was. Sometimes the dead leave behind the truth, you just have to know where to look. I hadn't set foot in my father's house since Martin changed the locks. That old Victorian home on Elmwood Avenue had always been my safe place. The scent of pipe tobacco in the library, the soft creak of the third stair, the sunlight spilling through lace curtains. Now it felt like enemy territory. But desperation has a way of silencing fear. Martin had sent me one final text after the court filings began. "Stay away from the property or I'll press charges for trespassing." I deleted it without replying. I told myself I wasn't trespassing, I was retrieving personal belongings. The few things of mine that still remained in the house. Things my father would have wanted me to keep. It was late, the air sharp with the promise of rain. I parked down the block and walked the rest of the way, my flashlight tucked into my jacket pocket. The front gate's hinges squealed like a warning. The key I'd kept for years no longer fit the lock, so I slipped through the side door where the frame had always been slightly warped. Inside, the house was cold and silent. The air smelled faintly of polish and dust, a sterile imitation of what used to be home. Every surface gleamed with Martin's taste for control, no clutter, no warmth, nothing left of the life we'd lived there. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I had a purpose. I moved through the downstairs rooms like a shadow, careful not to disturb anything. When I reached the staircase, I hesitated. I could almost hear my father's voice from the landing. "If you're ever looking for something important, check the attic." I always forget what I've hidden up there. The attic. My pulse quickened as I climbed, each step creaking like a heartbeat. The door at the top stuck for a moment before giving way, releasing a faint gust of stale air. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight like tiny ghosts. The space was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and stacks of books. A familiar musty smell clung to everything. Cedar, mothballs, and time. I felt like I was walking through my father's memories. In the far corner, half buried under a stack of yellowed newspapers, I found it, a trunk I hadn't seen in years. Dark wood, brass hinges, initials LH, carved faintly on the lid. I knelt and lifted it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside were notebooks, loose papers, and several small cassette tapes wrapped in tissue. I reached for one marked April. Final notes. My hands shook as I fed it into the old tape player stored beside it. When I pressed play, my father's voice filled the attic, soft, fragile, but unmistakably his. "Martin came by again today," he said, his tone weary. "He wants me to adjust the will. He says it's for convenience, that Gloria won't mind, but I can see it in his eyes he's in trouble. Gambling, maybe, debt. I won't let him use me to hurt her." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Dad paused in the recording, coughing weakly before continuing. "I've spoken with Mr. Holloway. I'll make the changes tomorrow to protect Gloria. Everything will go to her, as it should. Martin will get a fair portion, but not enough to destroy himself with." I covered my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. There it was proof that I wasn't imagining things. My father had known. He'd seen what Martin was becoming and tried to safeguard me. The tape continued. "If anything happens before I can explain it to her, she'll find the codicil in an envelope marked Addendum, private. It's notarized. She'll know what to do." My flashlight flickered, the sound of rain beginning to drum against the roof. The codicil. An envelope. I searched the trunk again, digging through piles of papers and faded letters, but it wasn't there. I scanned the attic, trying to think like my father. He'd always hidden important things in plain sight behind paintings, inside books, beneath floorboards. My gaze landed on the framed portrait of my mother leaning against the wall, its frame slightly crooked. I lifted it, and there it was, taped to the back. An envelope sealed in wax. The handwriting was my father's. Unmistakable. Addendum. Private. For a moment, I just stared, unable to breathe. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded document. The title read, Codicil to the Last Will and Testament of Leonard Hughes. My eyes raced over the words. Every line was written with care and precision, just like my father. It clearly stated that Gloria Hughes, was the primary heir, inheriting the house, business assets, and remaining savings. Martin was to receive a modest trust fund to support responsible endeavors. At the bottom was my father's steady signature, not the shaky imitation from Martin's will, but the real one, strong, familiar, authentic. And below it, the stamp and seal of a notary public, dated 1 week before his death. My hands shook so hard I had to set the paper down. My father hadn't betrayed me. He'd trusted me enough to protect his legacy, and Martin had destroyed that trust for greed. I sank onto the dusty floorboards, sobbing not just from relief, but from heartbreak. Dad had tried to make things right, even in his final days. He must have known Martin would come for everything, and he tried to shield me the only way he could. When I finally steadied myself, I took out my phone and snapped dozens of photos, every page, every seal, every corner. Then, I slid the codicil back into the envelope and tucked it securely into my bag. I stood and whispered to the empty attic, "You did your best, Dad. Now it's my turn." Before leaving, I wiped my fingerprints from the trunk and turned off the flashlight. As I reached the stairs, thunder rolled outside, shaking the windows. I paused one last time to look around. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel alone. It was as if my father's spirit was there with me, steady and proud. When I stepped out into the storm, rain soaked my hair and clothes, but I didn't care. I felt alive again, electric, unstoppable. Martin thought he had buried me under lies. He thought he had taken everything. But he had underestimated the one thing I'd never lost: the truth. And now, I had it in my hands. Martin stole my inheritance, but now, I had something worth far more: the truth. Revenge isn't about anger, it's about timing. After finding the codicil, something in me shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't the broken daughter or the desperate sister. I was a woman with purpose. My father had given me the truth, and now I had to use it. The next morning, I sat in a quiet cafe downtown with the codicil sealed safely in an envelope. I'd made an appointment with a new attorney, Amara Patel, a woman with a reputation for being sharp, fearless, and relentless. I chose her because she didn't care about small-town gossip or family politics. She cared about justice. When she arrived, she was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with calm eyes that missed nothing. She slid into the booth across from me and gestured to the envelope. "You brought something important, I assume?" I handed it to her. She read through the document carefully, flipping each page twice, then looked up. "This codicil is legitimate," she said. "Notarized, dated, properly worded. If this is real and everything checks out, your brother is in serious trouble." Relief surged through me, followed quickly by determination. "I want to expose him," I said. "Not just in court, publicly. He took everything from my father, from me. I want people to see who he really is." Miss Patel nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll do it right, quietly, strategically. The worst thing you can do to a liar is let him believe he's still in control." That line stayed with me. Over the next few days, we built the plan piece by piece. Miss Patel filed a motion to contest the will, attaching the codicil as newly discovered evidence. We prepared affidavits from the handwriting expert, Dr. Briggs, and secured a forensic report verifying the notary's stamp. Every detail was documented, time-stamped, airtight. But legal proof wasn't enough. Martin had spent months poisoning my reputation. People saw me as unstable, greedy, obsessed. I needed more than paperwork. I needed a moment. Something no one could deny. That's when Miss Patel suggested the dinner. You said your brother loves appearances, she reminded me. Use that. Let him show off. Let him feel untouchable. Then, when the truth hits, he'll have no room to run. The idea terrified me and thrilled me. But before any of that could happen, I had to make Martin believe I'd finally surrendered. I sent him a message the next morning. We need to talk. I'm tired of fighting. His reply came within minutes. Good. Let's meet. My house. 7 p.m. When I arrived, he greeted me at the door with that same self-satisfied smirk I'd come to despise. The house reeked of new money, expensive art, glass furniture, and no soul. Finally ready to let this go? He asked, pouring himself a drink. I forced a smile. You were right, I said softly. This fighting is tearing me apart. Dad wouldn't have wanted it. His posture relaxed. He raised his glass. 2 new beginnings. I clinked mine against his, forcing my hand not to tremble. I let him talk about his successful investments, about the property he planned to flip, about his growing connections in the city. Every word dripped with arrogance. Then, casually, I said, You really handled everything so quickly after Dad died. I still don't understand how you managed it all. He chuckled. Oh, Gloria, you'd be amazed what can get done with the right paperwork and a little creativity. I tilted my head. Creativity? He leaned back, swirling his drink. Dad's will was ancient. It needed an update. I just helped the process along. My pulse quickened. You mean you changed it? He smirked. Fixed it. Don't be dramatic. He would have done it himself if he'd been thinking clearly. I just made things simple. I laughed softly, though my stomach twisted. Simple, I repeated, glancing down to make sure my phone's recording app was still running in my pocket. He nodded, oblivious. Exactly. Besides, it's not like you need money. You've got your little shop. You'll be fine. I excused myself soon after, the conversation playing back in my head like a nightmare. But this time, the nightmare wasn't terrifying, it was empowering. I had what I needed. Proof. The next morning, I met Miss Patel at her office and played the recording. As Martin's voice filled the room, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp. This is perfect, she said. Between this and the codicil, the forgery report, and Holloway's statement, we can bury him legally and publicly. For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. Let's do it. We spent the next week preparing for the reveal. The court date was still pending, but Miss Patel suggested we make the truth known before the legal verdict. If you control the narrative, she said, he can't twist it anymore. So I sent out invitations to what I called a memorial dinner in honor of Leonard Hughes, signing each one with care. I invited cousins, family friends, even Mr. Holloway. Martin's name was written at the top of the list. The note read, a small gathering to celebrate Dad's life and share memories. Please bring a story, a photo, or a kind word. Martin called the next day, clearly suspicious. What's this about, Gloria? I smiled into the phone. You said Dad wanted peace in the family. I'm trying. He hesitated. Fine, but I'm not staying long. Of course not, I said sweetly. Behind the scenes, Miss Patel coordinated with a court officer to be present discreetly. Dr. Briggs prepared her statement for the eventual hearing, and the audio recording was backed up in 3 places. Every piece was in motion. On the morning of the dinner, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the creases in my navy dress. For the first time since Dad's funeral, I didn't see a broken woman staring back at me. I saw someone who had survived, someone who had learned to fight. As guests began to arrive that evening, I greeted them warmly, keeping my tone light. The air hummed with awkward small talk and the faint smell of roast chicken. Martin arrived last, wearing a gray suit and his usual air of smug confidence. He kissed my cheek. Nice of you to do this, Glory. Maybe you're finally growing up. I smiled. Maybe. When everyone had gathered, I stood at the head of the table, hands clasped. Thank you all for coming, I began. Dad loved this family more than anything. Tonight isn't about grief, it's about truth. Martin's brow furrowed. Truth? I looked him straight in the eye and smiled calmly. Yes, the truth he left behind. As I reached into my bag and touched the sealed envelope inside, My heart steadied. Martin thought he'd silenced my father forever. He had no idea my father was about to speak again. It was supposed to be a peaceful dinner until I pressed play on that recording. For days I'd rehearsed this night in my head, every breath, every word, every glance. The dining room gleamed beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. The table was set with Dad's old china, the same pattern he'd insisted we use for every holiday meal. I wanted it to feel familiar, comforting, because what I was about to do would shatter the illusion of family forever. Guests arrived one by one. Cousins, neighbors, a few family friends who still spoke to me despite the rumors. Their polite smiles couldn't hide their unease. Martin's name had weight now, the successful investor, the dutiful son. I was the one whispered about in grocery aisles. Tonight would change that. Martin arrived last, of course. He always liked an entrance. His gray suit was tailored, his cufflinks gleaming. "Smells great, Glory," he said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "Nice to see you finally moving on." I smiled tightly. I thought it was time we celebrated Dad properly. He raised his glass once everyone was seated. "To new beginnings," he announced, his voice smooth and practiced. "To family, and to putting the past behind us." A few half-hearted cheers followed. He looked around the table like a king addressing loyal subjects. I caught the flicker of arrogance in his eyes and almost laughed. He still believed he was untouchable. When the plates were cleared and dessert half-eaten, I rose from my chair. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. "I'd like to say a few words," I began. "About Dad." The chatter faded. "Dad taught me that integrity matters more than comfort, that the truth is something you protect, even when it costs you everything. He believed in honesty, in fairness, and in family." I paused, looking directly at Martin. Those were the values he wanted to leave behind. Martin forced a smile. "Beautiful words, sis. He'd be proud of you for finally letting it go." I met his gaze. "Oh, I'm letting something go, all right." From my pocket, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. "What's that?" he asked. "A memory," I said, pressing play. The sound that filled the room was fragile at first, the scratchy static of an old cassette. Then came my father's voice. "Martin came by again today," Dad said, weary but unmistakably lucid. "He wants me to change the will. Says it'll be simpler. But I know my son. He's drowning in debts, and I won't let him use me to hurt Gloria." The room went still. The only sound was the low hum of the recording. Gasps spread around the table. My cousin Laurel covered her mouth. Mr. Holloway, seated near the end, froze mid-sip of coffee. Martin shot to his feet, his face draining of color. "Turn that off!" he shouted. But I didn't. I let the next lines play. Dad, speaking softly, resolute. "I'm signing a codicil tomorrow. Gloria will inherit the estate. She'll take care of it. She always has." I stopped the recording. Silence hung heavy as thunder. Martin's voice broke through, harsh and desperate. "That's fake. You edited it." "Really?" I said quietly. "Because Dr. Eleanor Briggs authenticated the tape this morning. And the court officer over there," I nodded toward the man standing discreetly near the doorway, "can confirm it's already been entered into evidence." All heads turned toward the stranger in the gray suit. He stepped forward, expression neutral but authoritative. "Officer Raymond Holt, Probate Division. Miss Patel asked me to attend." Martin's jaw tightened. "This is a setup." "It's the truth," I said. I reached into my bag and withdrew the envelope, the one with my father's handwriting and wax seal. My heart hammered as I laid it gently on the table. "And here's something else you might recognize." He stared at it, silent, as Miss Patel, who'd been seated inconspicuously among the guests, stood and opened the envelope. She unfolded the codicil and placed it before him. "This document supersedes the previous will," she said. "It's notarized and dated 1 week before Mr. Hughes's death." "Mr." Holloway leaned forward, his eyes wide as he read. This is Leonard's true signature," he whispered. "I'd stake my career on it." The color drained completely from Martin's face. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "You forged that. You're all in on this." "Actually," Miss Patel replied evenly, "we can. The notary who witnessed this has already provided an affidavit. Dr. Briggs confirmed the handwriting. And we have an audio confession from you, Mr. Hughes, describing how you fixed the will to make things simple." Would you like us to play that next? He froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. The room erupted, murmurs, gasps, chairs scraping. Cousin Laurel stood, pointing a trembling finger at him. You lied to all of it to us. Martin turned on her. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, we do, I said quietly. We all do now. He looked around wildly, searching for an ally, but found only faces twisted with shame and disappointment. Then Officer Holt stepped forward, handing him a folded document. This is your official summons to appear in probate court next week. You are under investigation for fraud and document tampering. Martin's composure cracked. This is ridiculous, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You can't do this to me. Dad did this to you, I said softly. You just finished the job. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and then, without another word, he stormed toward the door. The front door slammed so hard that the chandelier rattled. No one moved. I sat down slowly, my knees weak, my heart racing. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, the same one that used to hang in Dad's study. Janine reached over and squeezed my hand. It's over, Gloria, she whispered. I nodded, though part of me knew it wasn't, not yet. Justice was finally breathing, but it still had a long walk ahead. Tears welled in my eyes. They weren't tears of grief this time, or rage. They were something different, release. I looked around the table at the stunned faces, at the pieces of my father's life that had finally been put back in their rightful place. The truth was finally free, but the fight for justice wasn't over yet. When the gavel hit, I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. Courtrooms have a strange way of amplifying silence. The polished wood, the echo of footsteps, the weight of anticipation, it all makes every word, every breath, feel heavier. For months I'd lived for this day. I'd relived every lie, every humiliation, every sleepless night. Now, as I sat behind the plaintiff's table, it all came down to this. Miss Patel sat beside me, calm as ever, her notes neatly organized in front of her. Across the aisle, Martin looked smaller than I remembered. No suit could disguise the exhaustion etched across his face. His arrogance had drained away, replaced by something raw and ugly, fear. The judge entered, a stern woman named Honorable Judith Myers, known for her sharp mind and intolerance for deceit. When she called the court to order, her voice carried a gravity that seemed to settle right into my bones. Case number 1429 Hughes versus Hughes. The clerk read aloud. Matter of contested will and alleged forgery. My stomach knotted. Miss Patel began her presentation methodically. She laid out the forged will, first the one Martin had delivered to Mr. Holloway. The judge examined it closely, frowning at the shaky, uneven signature. Then, piece by piece, my lawyer introduced every artifact of truth we'd gathered. The certified handwriting analysis from Drs. Briggs. The notary affidavit verifying the codicil's legitimacy. The recordings, both my father's voice and Martin's own careless confession. Each one landed like a stone dropped into still water. The courtroom murmured with quiet shock as the evidence piled up. When the tape of my father's voice played again, the same recording that had silenced our family at the dinner, I saw the judge lean forward, listening intently. Even after all these months, hearing him say my name in that tired but loving tone broke something open inside me. Then came the financial records. Miss Patel called in a forensic accountant who revealed Martin's mounting debts, casino withdrawals, unpaid loans, and credit card bills that painted a desperate picture. He had both motive and opportunity, the accountant concluded. Martin's lawyer, a slick man with too much confidence, tried to counter. He argued that my father had second thoughts, that the codicil might have been coerced or forged by me. But when the notary herself took the stand and testified that she'd watched my father sign it in person, his argument crumbled. By the time Martin was called to testify, his defiance was gone. He avoided my eyes, stammering through answers, contradicting himself more than once. At one point, Judge Myers stopped him mid-sentence. Mr. Hughes, she said coldly, if you continue lying under oath, I will hold you in contempt. He went silent after that. The trial lasted 3 days. But to me, it felt like a lifetime compressed into hours. When closing statements were done, the judge asked everyone to rise as she reviewed her notes. The courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the clock above her bench. Finally, she spoke. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including expert testimony, notarized documentation, and verified recordings, this court finds that the original will submitted by Mr. Martin Hughes was fraudulently altered. My breath caught. She continued, her voice firm. The codicil presented by Miss Gloria Hughes is confirmed valid and will be reinstated as the legal expression of the decedent's wishes. I closed my eyes, the words sinking in like sunlight through cold glass. It was over, but Judge Myers wasn't done. She turned her gaze to Martin. Mr. Hughes, you have committed a serious crime against both your family and this court. You will be charged with fraud, forgery, and perjury. Considering your cooperation after the fact and your lack of prior convictions, I'm sentencing you to 2 years of probation, restitution to your sister for legal costs, and 500 hours of community service. Martin's shoulders sagged. He didn't look angry, just defeated. For the first time, I saw him not as my enemy, but as a man broken by his own greed. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs, reporters scribbling notes, family members whispering. Miss Patel turned to me, a small smile on her face. Congratulations, Gloria. Your father would be proud. I could only nod. My throat was too tight for words. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp and clean. A small crowd had gathered, family members, a few locals, even people I hadn't spoken to in months. Cousin Laurel approached me first, tears shining in her eyes. Gloria, I'm so sorry, she said. We all believed him. We shouldn't have. I took her hands gently. It's over now, I said. That's enough. One by one, others came forward, neighbors, friends, offering apologies, hugs, sometimes just quiet nods. I accepted them all, not out of pride, but because bitterness had no place left in me. Martin exited the courthouse, flanked by his lawyer, his head bowed. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no hatred in me anymore, only sadness. He'd lost far more than money. He'd lost the one thing that could never be replaced: family. I turned away. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery, the same small hill where my father was buried beneath an old oak tree. The leaves rustled as I walked toward his grave, the air heavy with the scent of earth and rain. I knelt and placed a folded copy of the court's ruling beside his headstone. We did it, Dad, I whispered. It's over. For a moment, the wind shifted, brushing against my cheek like a touch warm, reassuring, almost human. I looked up through the branches, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or fear, just peace. As I stood, I noticed how the sunlight caught the edges of the gravestone, lighting his name in gold. Leonard Hughes, father, teacher, honest man. That's how I wanted to remember him, not as the man caught in Martin's schemes, but as the man who raised me to fight for truth. When I walked back to my car, I felt lighter, like I'd finally stepped out of a long, dark tunnel. Justice had been served. But forgiveness, that would take longer. Winning in court was justice, healing my heart was something else entirely. When the trial ended, the world didn't suddenly feel lighter. Justice doesn't erase the past. It only stops the bleeding. The scars remain, quiet reminders of what was lost. Months have passed since that day in court, and in that time, I've begun to rebuild not just what my brother destroyed, but what grief took from me. The first thing I did was return to the house on Elmwood Avenue, my father's house, my childhood home. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to step inside. I feared the silence, the ghosts of arguments, the memories of loss. But when I finally unlocked the front door, sunlight spilled across the floors as if the house had been waiting for me. The walls still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, running my fingers over the worn banister Dad had built himself. The place was battered, neglected, but it was still ours. I decided to restore it not just for me, but for him. Over the next few months, I worked side by side with a small team of local carpenters. Some of my estranged relatives even showed up to help. Cousin Laurel came first, guilt etched across her face. I can't change what I believed, she said quietly, but maybe I can help fix what I broke. I handed her a paintbrush and smiled. Then start with that wall. Slowly, room by room, the house came back to life. I kept the original layout, the wood floors, and the old fireplace that had cracked with age. In the living room, I turned one corner into a small reading space, a cozy nook with shelves filled with my father's favorite books. I hung his portrait above it and placed a brass plaque on the wall, the Leonard Hughes Reading Retreat, a place for truth and healing. It became my sanctuary. Every Saturday, I opened the doors to the public. Locals came to read, to think, to breathe. Some just wanted to sit in silence, surrounded by stories. Watching them filled me with something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Life began to bloom again in unexpected places. The relatives who once avoided me now came by often. We cooked meals together, laughed in the kitchen, argued over furniture choices like old times. For the first time since Dad's death, the word family didn't make my chest ache. One morning, a letter arrived, no return address, just my name written in a familiar hand. Inside was a short note. Gloria, I can't undo what I did. I've lost everything: my career, my reputation, my peace. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I'm sorry. Martin and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the words. There was no apology grand enough to rebuild what he'd destroyed, yet something in me softened. I didn't write back. But that night, I lit a candle in the reading room and prayed, not for him to return, but for him. To finally learn what our Father had tried to teach us both: that truth always finds its way home. In the months that followed, I found ways to use my pain. Miss Patel invited me to speak at a community center in Albany about elder fraud and family betrayal. Standing at that podium, I looked out at dozens of faces: sons, daughters, widows, all carrying stories like mine. I told them that justice doesn't come from rage, but from persistence. That silence is the thief's best friend. And that sometimes, the people who hurt us most are the ones who taught us how strong we really are. After the talk, a woman approached me in tears. "You gave me hope," she said. I hugged her and realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd found a new kind of healing, one born from helping others find their voice. Back in town, my bookstore began to thrive again. Customers returned, drawn by the quiet resilience that seemed to hang in the air. The shelves filled with new titles. The bell over the door rang with laughter again. I started hosting a weekly book club called Truth Tellers. We talked about stories of survival, redemption, courage, the very things that had saved me. One evening, a local shelter held an adoption fair outside the shop. I hadn't planned on adopting anything, but then a scruffy brown dog with tired eyes wandered over and placed his paw on my knee. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. I named him Harvey, after my father's favorite novel, Harvey Birch, The Spy. From that day on, Harvey followed me everywhere: to the shop, on my morning walks, even to the reading retreat. He became a quiet companion, a reminder that love doesn't always come from blood. My days found rhythm again: coffee at sunrise, walks along the river, evenings spent reading in the glow of the fireplace. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night, hearing echoes of the courtroom or my father's frail voice on that recording. But the readings of live nightmares didn't hold power anymore. They were just reminders of what I'd survived, of who I'd become. I began to realize that my father's true gift to me wasn't the house, or the savings, or even the vindication of the truth. It was courage, the courage to fight for what's right, to keep believing even when the world calls you foolish, and to rise after being betrayed by your own blood. And forgiveness that came slowly, not because Martin deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Carrying hatred was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to fall. So, one quiet morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, I whispered, "I forgive you." Not loudly, not for anyone to hear, just for myself. Now, when people ask how I survived it all, I tell them this: the truth doesn't just set you free. It rebuilds you, piece by piece, until you become someone stronger than you ever were before. One evening, as I was closing the bookstore, the last light of the setting sun poured through the front window, painting the shelves gold. I turned off the lamps, locked the door, and stood for a moment in the quiet glow. The air was warm, peaceful, and full of possibility. I looked up at the framed photograph of my father that hung above the register, the one of him smiling with his arm around me, both of us covered in paint after we'd built the first shelves for the shop decades ago. I smiled back. "You were right, Dad," I whispered softly. my hand resting over my heart. The truth always wins eventually. In the end, I didn't just win back what was mine. I won back my peace. My brother's lies may have cost me years, but they taught me that truth never stays buried. I rebuilt my life brick by brick, not for revenge, but for redemption. And now, when I close my father's bookshop each night, I whisper the words he always said: the truth always wins eventually. If you felt what I felt, that ache, when truth fights its way through lies, then you know stories like mine aren't just stories. They're reminders of how strong the human heart can be. So if this one touched you, share it, let others hear it, and stay with me for more true battles of family and justice. But tell me this: if someone you loved betrayed you for money, would you forgive them, or would you make them face the truth, no matter the cost?